Hello, APBIO. This is a video to try to connect and help you understand an overview of the immune system and then also specifically the human immune system. So I went pretty fast in class yesterday and I just want to tie up some loose ends. So in the beginning, we started talking about the different defenses organisms have across all three domains. In the prokaryotic domain, we have restriction enzymes. I'm hoping that you watch this video to learn about both physical and chemical defenses in plants. Physical defenses, like I talked about in class, are things like thorns and spines and trichomes. And then there's also chemical defenses as well. We've got the plants have the hypersensitive response and also acquired resistance. Here you can see a diagram of the hypersensitive response. So if there's some type of an invasion, in this case it's showing a virus here, invading plant cells, all of the cells will carry out, these guys will send the signal here to carry out apoptosis, and then this whole area will die in a leaf or in some place in a plant, and then it saves the rest of all those tissues surrounding it. And those are both internal chemical defenses. There's also chemical defenses that just sort of defend against herbivory by something tasting bad or something burning your tongue, like capsin is the spicy substance that's in peppers that makes herbivores not want to eat them. In any case, now we're going to shift over to the human immune system. I talked about it differently in all the classes, so I'm just going to go through step by step and sort of make sure that you can get at least pieces and parts, and you can fast forward to the parts that I already gave you in class. Like I said, I did it differently in all three blocks, so I apologize if it's redundant for what you saw in class or what you heard in class. The first thing I want you to do is pause the video, and I want you to listen to this overview of the immune system. He does a really good job of just touching on all the different parts of the human immune system. Keep in mind that the human immune system is different than other animal immune systems, and I'll make a note in a minute where all organisms have some type of protection system, but the human immune system is different, and I'm just specifically going to talk about the human immune system. There are complex immune systems in other organisms as well, but for the purpose of this course, you need to understand the human immune system. You may also want to watch this video. It's another good video that just sort of goes through the different pieces and parts of your immune system. Okay, so let's start. Let's start here in your notes. I definitely talked about physical barriers, and now I want non-specific physical barriers: your skin, your pH in your stomach, and the mucous membranes that line all your cavities that interface directly with the environment. But then we're going to shift to non-specific internal defenses. So I've broken it into sort of two pathways, you can think of them as, and there's different types of cells. In the human immune system, there's specific cells that are involved with producing either actually doing the activity of the protection or producing the signaling molecule that initiates a protective response. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the inflammatory response. So that's a response, it's a collection of cellular responses that are actually organismal responses that result in protection of or protection against whatever the invading pathogen is. The responses, you can think of it in a similar way that the way we talked about the epinephrine signaling pathway. So it's a totally different pathway. I'm not saying that the pathways are similar. It's just that when we think about the adrenaline rush, you can think about all the things that happen to your body. Well, the inflammatory response, you can think about all the things that happen to your body. So you've gotten bitten by a mosquito. What are all the things that happen to your body? Well, the area gets red, you have swelling, it feels a little bit hot. And all of those things are not actually the mosquito causing those things. Your body actually causes those things to happen in order to defend you. So it's actually a signal that your body is working. So, for example, the redness when you get a mosquito bite is the vasodilation refers to the dilation, sort of the opening of your blood vessels, and it brings extra blood to the area, the site of, you can think of it as trauma or where the pathogen is. The swelling is the leaking of proteins and white blood cells out of the capillaries. So there's actually space that's made so those cells and those substances can leak into the area where the problem is, and so they can do their job, because these are actively going to be fighting infection, unlike some of the, so this response in general is not active. The redness isn't actively fighting, but these white blood cells, we'll talk about them in a minute, are actively fighting infection, and the proteins are actively fighting infection. And then also the area is going to, your body will increase the temperature in the area, the purpose of that, or actually the result of that, I should say, and why that's selected for as a reaction, is because the increased temperature increases the reaction rate. And that's one thing, so it'll speed healing. The other thing is that many pathogens are particularly sensitive to temperature changes. And so we have a little bit more, our proteins have a little bit more stability and can manage a little bit more temperature change. We're multicellular, so we have a lot more, a localized area of temperature change isn't going to impact an entire organism. And for that reason, it's a positive response in that it increases the reaction rate without harming the entire organism, but does harm the pathogens. So this inflammatory response, if you think about what a cellular response or organismal response starts with, they always have to start with, or not always, but they often start with a ligand. And the ligand that is responsible for resulting in all of these particular responses is what a histamine is. You have specialized cells in your connective tissue called mast cells, and they are going to produce this histamine ligand. And that ligand, when it goes through its signal transduction pathway, think about it, you can even pause the video and think, okay, what the heck is this signal transduction pathway? Think about that. This is the ligand that turns that pathway on. Now, sometimes people have an oversensitivity to some type of thing in the environment that's not actually a pathogen. And in that particular case, we have medications that actually stop the inflammatory response. So for example, if you have seasonal allergies and your body initiates the inflammatory response as a result of grass pollen, then your body is going through all of this or responding in this way, which is uncomfortable, and actually grass pollen is not a pathogen. So because of that, people with allergies, seasonal allergies, will take medications called antihistamines, which just stop the inflammatory response. Okay, so that's one non-specific internal defense. Here's the response, here's the ligand, and you can imagine in between there's the transduction stage of the signal transduction pathway. Now, another set of internal responses results from, again, we're still talking about innate defenses, so these are inborn defenses. It results from these active protective cells. So we have the whole group of protective cells are called leukocytes, and leukocytes are just white blood cells, a fancy name for white blood cells. And there's two different types. There's the white blood cells that are non-specific. They're inborn. Everybody has them. They're part of a component of your blood, and they're going to look for things that are not you. And they are not specific to a particular pathogen. And we call those phagocytes. It's a general category of a non-specific white blood cell. And then in a minute, we're going to talk about lymphocytes, which are part of your acquired defense system. Those are also white blood cells. So there's many, many different types of white blood cells. In any case, in general, what white blood cells are going to do is they're going to patrol all your different tissues, And when they're going to do their best to fight a pathogen themselves, but when they're fighting that pathogen, they may or may not start to lose. But what they also do when they detect a pathogen is they use the signaling molecules. Two different examples of signaling molecules in the immune system are cytokines and interleukins. And they're going to call for other immune system substances to come to that site or to be produced, or they're going to activate and stimulate the movement of those materials to a particular place in the body, or to a site of wherever there might be a pathogen. Now, the way that these cells actually get to wherever there is a pathogen is they have to get all the way to where either an infected cell is or a pathogen is. And so in order to get all the way there, if you can imagine the blood vessels in your body, they only can get so small. And then these you can think of them, like I said, as active fighters. These white blood cells need to get all the way to the site of infection. And so they actually move by a process of what's called diapedesis. So they get all the way there in your blood or in your lymph fluids. And then they actually can squeeze through the capillary walls in a process called diapedesis. So it's just to imagine that the cells are needing to get all the way to the site of the problem site. Okay, so if we think about back to this idea of we have these different types of white blood cells, and I'm going to first talk about these phagocytes, because again, we're talking about cellular innate defenses. These are not cells that are looking for specific pathogens. They're just looking for anything that's not you. And there's 5 different types. These monocytes float around in your body fluids in your blood, and they will mature into macrophages. And macrophages are just, you can think of macro meaning large and phage meaning eat. So they're just big eaters. And all they do is go around and they eat anything that's not you. So they engulf pathogens. So those pathogens might be viruses, they might be bacteria, they might be other toxic substances from the environment. And when they do that, they release these signaling molecules that recruit other immune responses. Because if you think about it, there's likely more than one pathogen, so they may need help. Now, sometimes alone, they can just gobble something up and then it's done, but often they're going to need help. Now, the help comes from these other cells, and then we'll switch over to the other section of your immune system in a minute. But other types of these phagocytes, these innate immune system white blood cells, are neutrophils. These are the most abundant type, and these are going to die after a single use, and that's what pus is. Another type of white blood cell, non-specific white blood cell, is something called an eosinophil. These combat multicellular pathogens, so they're going to eat really big things. There's not that many of them. They also are involved with control mechanisms of allergies. So when you have problems with your eosinophils, you often are allergic to different things. So they're controlling sensitivity to things that are not pathogens, like grass pollen, or even like some substances in like tree nuts or whatever. Basophils are the least common type of white blood cell. They're involved also in the inflammatory response that we talked about just a second ago with mast cells. So basophils are involved with this response as well. And they're also involved with different allergic reactions. And then the last type of non-specific innate white blood cell is called a natural killer cell, or an NK cell. And these patrol the blood and the lymph fluids for what's called, you can think of as damaged or bad MHC1. So MHC is a protein that's on the outside of all of your cells, and it stands for major histocompatibility complex. And it says, it's like a dress tag that says, "Hi, I'm Ms. Gorman," and all my cells say, "Hi, I'm Miss Gorman." And when there's something wrong with your cell, like say it does something funny in the S phase of replication, or there's a pathogen that invades it, it will hold and say, please come and get me. There's something wrong with me. You need to come and get me. And that's what your natural killer cell does. It looks for MHC distress flags, and it goes around and actually kills your own cells that are having problems. Okay, I'm going to talk about antigen presenting cells in the next video because I am out of time. Thanks for listening. I hope this was helpful.